Thanks, Susan.
Okay, hi, my name is Susan Milstein. I just wanted to welcome everyone. I'm chair of the Adult Education Committee, and we're really thrilled to have our speaker direct from Israel today, Yaakov, Selavan. And I'd like to invite everyone to just put your questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring them, and then at the end, we'll review them all. So I really want to thank Tony Erdis because Tony's the one who made this connection for us. So Tony, why don't you go ahead and introduce our speaker and we'll just get going. And please, everyone, if you could mute your machine.
Thank you. And thank you, Yaakov. And I'm going to let you, Yaakov, talk about your military career and work that you do. I don't want to not be accurate there, but I just want to introduce Yaakov from the standpoint of a human that I met, and he's a wonderful person. He grew up in the historic old city of Jerusalem, the son of American parents, the way I understand it, right? The parents instilled in him a deep appreciation for community service, and his life has been driven by this. Today, he lives in Golan Heights with his wife, Nava, and they're a growing family. They have 3 daughters, and they met and played with my daughter, Shira, very nicely there when we went several times. And just as of 3 weeks ago, they have a brand new baby boy. Their son's birthday in the middle of the war was particularly notable because in a striking coincidence, both the governor of Golan Heights and the deputy governor, which is Yaakov, became fathers within a week of each other. A very nice photo opportunity for them, and I saw it. It was lovely in the middle of the war. To me, that captures the spirit of Golan Heights. Life and hope persist even in the most challenging of times. It is a young and dynamic community. I think it's younger than the Israel national average, which is 30. 30 years old is the national average for Israel. So, and I think Golan is actually even younger, but I could be wrong. And it's clear that leaders like Yaakov are doing their part to keep that trend going and lowering the average age there. But beyond the numbers, I just wanted to mention one more thing about the warmth and the entrepreneurial drive in that region. And Yaakov shared these qualities with us firsthand with the family when we visited. He took us to to see soldiers on a military base where we offered small gifts from Portland and from Oregon, and it meant a lot to them, and it meant a lot to Yaakov actually, because he really respects the work of those soldiers and the way they defend Israel in Golan Heights. From there, we explored the goat farm with cheese shops, and then we went to a version of You Pick strawberries, and we spoke with the farmer there, shared stories, and picked strawberries. And then he took us to this ice cream shop where the lady was making ice cream, said, let's make ice cream with the strawberries you pick from the farmer. So we made fresh ice cream strawberries with the strawberries we picked. It sounds like a naive little story, but it just shows how they collaborate. It's a small community. Not that many people live there. The density is not high. They collaborate with each other. They support each other. And that was then, a lot of joy, a lot of peace. And then the war began. And Yaakov, I will pass it on to you here. We are very grateful for you to join us in this challenging circumstances for you. I'm sure you are very busy. We are honored to hear from you, so please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So maybe I want to start with saying thank you. I want to say thank you. As Tony said, of course, my schedule is very busy, but When Tony asks, I don't say no. And I want to say thank you because I'll share with you, it's a little bit off topic of our subject today. But today is January 8th. For many people, it means nothing. It's just another January 8th. A year ago, exactly in this time, around 9 p.m., I was in the midst of running I can't say a rescue operation, but a searching operation for 6 missing bodies of soldiers that tragically died in a horrible operational accident, which I was part of its management. And many were wounded. One of them is a very famous Israeli singer, Idan Amedi. And the explosion that occurred in this horrible, tragic incident, we started with thinking we're missing 23 soldiers. We went down to 6 all night. My job as the combat operations officer there was to bring in searching dogs, searching teams, trackers to try and find the bodies, because as we got a tragic reminder today with the return of the bodies of 2 more hostages, for a family not to know what's happening to their son, it's the worst. If it's the end, let me know it's the end. And I want to tell you that every soldier who took part on ground, I was at the headquarters, but every soldier who took part on ground in this operation told me after that it was the holiest moment of their service and hardest moment of their service. But we blew up 12 tons of explosive, just to understand how far people went to, let's put it that way. And I don't think there's another army that by 5 a.m., after the incident happened at 3 p.m., at 5 a.m., each family got a knock on the door telling them, we have the body of your son, and there's a funeral. And it was under a lot of danger and under a lot of pressure. And I don't think I ever imagined a year later that I'll be talking to you after another round in Gaza and Lebanon, and after a short visit a week ago in Syria, and that I'll be involved in the war in a whole different war than I was in a whole different way than I was then. So this is a day where I'm trying to keep myself occupied, and you guys are helping me. So thank you for that. With that being said, my name is Yaakov, and I'm, as Tony said, for the past 10 months, I've been the deputy governor of the Golan Heights. I was born and raised, as Tony said, American parents. I moved here to the Golan 12 and a half years ago due to my military service. I served and I still serve in a tank unit called the 188. It's a tank unit that was historically responsible for the Golan Heights, including in the epic battles of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And I can tell you that today the unit's operating all around Israel. As we speak, this morning, the unit entered Gaza for its second round after being in Lebanon and Syria. I'm here, of course. I'm staying up north due to the war here. But the unit's headquarters are located here in the Golan, so I moved up here so I can serve and live in the same region, which was, by the way, my childhood dream, because as Tony said, it's such a beautiful place, and I'll give you the atmosphere in a moment. And I left the army 8 years ago, but we fell in love with this beautiful place. We decided to stay. And on October 6, 23, I was a candidate in a political campaign and also a public speaker, founder of an organization, other things. One of my jobs in my unit was to be the unit's heritage officer. My job till a few months ago, when I had to ask someone to replace me, a colleague of mine, I was responsible to research the heritage of my unit and pass it on to the next generation. One of the most exciting things for me during the war was that I helped the soldiers tell their current story. Not just, if I used to teach them the stories of the past, suddenly I was helping them create the stories of the present. And one of the most amazing moments I experienced was exactly a week ago when I stood in Syria with the soldiers of the unit, a moment I never thought I'll have in my lifetime. And we stood there looking into Israel. By the way, fun fact about this picture, aside from the fact that it's on a Syrian military base, is that this guy was the commander of the tank. He's from my unit, the 188. He commanded the tank that eliminated Yahya Sinwar a few months ago. Okay, this is the guy. And I'll just say that we stood in Syria, but we looked into Israel, and I was able to take videos and photos driving in the route the Syrians attacked Israel in the Golan Heights in 1973, and I was able to send it live to the fighters of 73 that faced them and have never been in Syria. So that was a phenomenal moment for me. And I'll just say regarding my personal life, as Tony said, aside from being in Syria, the most exciting thing that happened recently is that both the governor and I became fathers 5 days apart, which of course was a great story for the media. And it really, I'll just share with you that it meant, especially after what I began with and shared with you my personal experience exactly a year ago, I was in the hospital for many, many hours. There were so many people in line, and the doctors told us that they've never experienced such pressure. So we called another hospital, and we were told the same thing. And we called another hospital, and they said the same thing. And this, what we call baby boom, in Israel, I think is unbelievable. And it's just the Jewish way. You choose life, and you continue no matter what, and no matter how painful it is. And I just remember myself looking around, you know, at all these dozens of families that have been there in the waiting room for 20 hours, and I'm already there with my son. And I just looked at myself and I said, they can't beat us. They don't understand who they're messing with. So with that said, what we're going to do tonight, and I'll try making it a little bit shorter than my introductory, I'll introduce you to the Golan. I'll speak a little bit about the region. What have we gone through so far since the war began, facing Lebanon and Syria? And I'll try putting an emphasis on what's happening in the past few days and weeks, as I can tell you that I feel it on a daily basis with all of the every day I get phone calls from international journalists that are wanting to come to the Golan and see what's happening on the other side of the border and discuss it. So of course, that's the most interesting thing. Maybe let's start with saying a word about the region that I have the privilege of being part of its leadership for the last 10 months, and that is the Golan. So I'll start with, maybe for those who might not know, where are we? This is the Golan. You can see the Sea of Galilee, and we're in northern Israel, northeastern Israel. Lebanon is here, and Syria is everything you see here, and down here is Jordan, meaning we border with 3 different countries. Jordan we have peace with, but we have our eyes open towards what's happening there, because we are not sure the regime there is stable enough to hold it. Syria we'll discuss in depth, of course. And of course, we have our friends in Lebanon, north of this place called Majd al-Shams. Let's not maybe look at the map. Let's get a look at what does it feel like.
לא שומעים.
So I'll just say, if you can't hear, it's okay. I should have spoken while we're doing it. Thanks for saying, Rabbi. But this is what our region looks like. And on a daily basis, when you ask Israelis, what is the Golan for them? It's vacation. Look at the views. It's agriculture. It's water canyons. It's cherry picking. It's snow. That's the Golan for the average Israeli. But I'll say that maybe let's talk about the importance of the Golan. The reason why Israel holds the Golan today and is settled in the Golan is not because it has the most beautiful views, which it has, as you just saw, and because there's snow and water canyons. It's for, I think, I would say 3 main reasons. The first thing is that I'm holding here a coin from the time of the Second Temple. This is a coin that was found here in the Golan. And it was actually stamped during the Great Revolt against the Romans. And it says for the redemption of Jerusalem the Holy. And it was found here roughly 50 years ago. And it's just one little finding. There are over 30 ancient synagogues from the time of the Second Temple in the Talmudic period in the Golan. Actually, after the Second Temple was destroyed and the Jews were expelled from Jerusalem, many came to the Golan, and there was more than 250,000 Jews living here. We'll talk about what's here today. So the first thing when people ask me, why are you here? It's because we came home. It's just like I'm in Jerusalem and just like I'm in Beersheba. It's our homeland. This is where we belong. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the Golan, we're in the Middle East, a very dry region. And we see here the most important water source in Israel, the Sea of Galilee. And the waterheads that lead to the Sea of Galilee are in the Golan, in the northern Golan. And also strategically, the height, as you saw in the video briefly, when you sit in the Golan, you control also the waterheads, but also the Sea of Galilee itself. And what happened was, before Israel came back to the Golan in 1967, after losing its sovereignty in the year of 67, is that the Syrians tried tilting that a project to try taking over the waterheads, so to sort of dry out the Sea of Galilee. And the pioneers that were living around the Sea of Galilee, their lives were also miserable. If you've seen the excellent series called The Spy in Netflix, Eli Cohen, then you see the opening episode, how the Syrian army is bombing the residents of northern Israel living under. And that leads me to the third point, the Golan Heights. It's the highest region in Israel. And if you're sitting there, you have strategic control of everything happening under you, the northern Galilee and the Sea of Galilee. So those are the three things why the Golan is so important. When we speak about, I know Israeli politics are messed up, but I will explain to you. First of all, when you see this map, just understand that we're talking about roughly 300,000 acres, the size of Tel Aviv and a nearby city of Petah Tikva. That's our size. Within this nice piece of land, there are 7 regional councils or municipalities. Where the green is us, the Golan, we're the biggest one. And by the way, we're the second largest regional council in the whole state of Israel. But we also have a small town, which is our capital, called Katzrin. It has its own mayor and its own municipality. And we have a small town bordering with Lebanon, by the way, split between Israel and Lebanon, called Rajal, which is Alawites. Okay, Alawites are a breakoff of Islam. Bashar al-Assad, by the way, is an Alawite. And last but not least, we have 4 Druze communities in the north of the Golan. You can see the names there, 4 towns. All in all, everything I just described to you, in the Golan, there are roughly 55,000 people living. 21,600 are ours. There's another 7,000 in Katzrin, the capital, and the rest are not Jewish. They're Druze. So it's just one interesting thing, but just you can see that the community, I'll just say, in our community is mixed, religious and non-religious, conservatives and liberals, all in all. Relatively young community. Just think about it. The first towns were established in 1967. So our oldest people are roughly 80 years old. We're considered a very young community. And one last thing I'll say, and maybe we'll speak about the Druze for a moment, because I think it's very important to understand the Druze story in the Golan, especially in what's happening the past few weeks. But I'll just say that up to the year of 2000, there were negotiations between Israel and Syria. Maybe we should give the Golan to the Syrians. And President Clinton led the negotiations. And I would say that the Golan had a big question mark on it. I'll explain how it affected the Druze in a moment, but I'll just say, at the year of 2000, there were roughly 12,000 Jews living in the Golan. And after the year of 2000, when another round of negotiations fell, a new mayor was elected, and he ran a PR campaign rebranding the Golan. And it led to, and of course, he put a lot of money, he brought a lot of government money into planning. And when he left office at 2018, he already tripled the amount of Jews living in the Golan. So that's something that happened after that. And with that said, let's say a word about our Druze brothers, sisters, and neighbors. The Druze community in Israel is very, very loyal to the state of Israel. You might be surprised, but also in Lebanon, the Druze people are very loyal to the strongest political party in Lebanon, which today is Hezbollah. In Syria, they used to be loyal to Assad, and that's because the Druze is a minority that broke off from Islam in the 11th century, and they're considered heretics by the Muslims. And therefore, for centuries, the Muslims tried killing them. So the Druze religion says, first of all, you stay on a low key. You don't want your own independent state. You live high in the mountains. You'll almost always find the Druze on mountains, including in the Golan Heights, to be protected. And you must be connected to the strongest political force in your country to make sure that you stay safe. So in Israel, in 1947, the Druze leadership makes a decision. We're going with the Jews. In Lebanon and in Syria, they go with the strongest party there. Now you have a group, 25,000 people today, that live in 4 towns. Up to 1967, they were Syrian. Just a mile away from them, there was another town, part of their community, which suddenly there's a new political border splitting families, splitting the tribes. And that led to an interesting, only in the Middle East, I think you can find such a messed up situation where, first of all, you have people who lived under a dictator and suddenly found out there's such a thing called democracy. And the Syrian regime did not invest too much in the Golan before we came. It was mainly military bases and a few communities that they brought of people from here and there. There weren't proper roads, there weren't proper facilities. Suddenly, Israeli tourists start coming to the Golan. The economy is growing, the roads are becoming better, there's a sewage system, there's water systems. You have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, you're safe, life is great. But first of all, you might be sent back to Syria, right? If you give the Golan back to Syria, and then Assad will say, you were loyal to Israel, I'm going to kill you. Secondly, your brothers and sisters a mile away from you, less than a mile away from you, are under the Syrian regime. And if they found out that you're loyal to Israel, they'll kill them. So when you would speak on camera to Druze people, they would say, please send us back to Syria. We want to be Syrian. We're Syrian. And then when you turn off the camera, they say, please make sure we stay Israeli. But most of our Druze neighbors here in the Golan are not Israeli citizens. They don't have a blue and white ID. We'll speak soon about the impact of the war. So I'll just say one of the most incredible phenomena is also an excellent Israeli movie called The Syrian Bride, is that, remember, no internet, no international phone calls, and there's families that are split by a political border. So if you can Google afterwards the Shouting Hill, you'll see an amazing phenomenon where 2 family members are updating each other. What's happening? Mazel tov, I had a baby girl. Oh, maybe let's I had a baby son. Maybe let's make sure they get married in 18 years. And they're having discussions. And my son just finished his first degree. Oh, well, right. That's what was happening there. And in 2011, a civil war breaks out in Syria, March 2011. And suddenly the young generation in the Druze villages of the Golan, who have been hearing from their grandparents how they must go back to Syria, right? Syria is so amazing. We're Syrian. They have smartphones, and they see on the other side of the border, the butcher from Damascus, Assad, killing his own people, including Druze people. And they start asking, 1 second, this is what our parents want us to be part of? And we start seeing more and more young Druze starting to integrate into Israeli society, getting IDs, Israeli IDs, learning Hebrew. They couldn't go learn in Damascus. They used to get free scholarships from Assad to keep the connection. Suddenly they lost it. And in 2019, the United States administration, led by President Trump, recognizes Israeli sovereignty over the Golan. And since then, we see an increasement of 200% in Druze, not only the youngsters, but also adults who start becoming more and more part of the state of Israel. Even drafting to the Israeli Defense Forces. Ironically enough, the first Druze from the Golan who drafted to the Israeli army was a doctor who got his diploma in Damascus. And he became a doctor in the Israeli army. So Assad paid for his studies, and then he joined the Israeli army in 2020. So that's a word about the Druze. You understand that we have a very interesting region. And maybe I want to share with you a few words about what we've gone through so far, and then we'll discuss what we're going through in the past few weeks. So
may I give a little bit of context that people may not know, if you don't mind? Sorry to interrupt, but just one piece that's important. The question might be, why were we talking about giving back the Golan Heights? What was the rationale behind it? There was a strong belief at that period of time that the pathway to peace in the Middle East ran through Damascus. That if the only thing that was keeping Syria angry at Israel was that Israel had occupied the Golan Heights. If Israel gave it back, Syria would join Egypt and Jordan in making peace. And if Syria made peace, then everyone else would make peace. We've certainly come to learn that idea that the path to peace ran through Damascus was probably a dream.
During this, I'll just add, Rabbi, thank you. I'll add two things. That first of all, during the civil war, it became a consensus in Israel, including the most radical left-wing parties, agreed that thank God we didn't give the Golan to Assad, because we would wake up and have ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which controlled the border with Israel during the civil war, and today are controlling Syria. We'll talk about that soon. We would have them at the Sea of Galilee. And the second thing I'll say is that in the mid-90s, when it looked real that the Golan will be given back to Syria, there was a huge public political campaign called Ha'am im HaGolan. The nation is with the Golan. Don't give the Golan back to Syria. It was the most successful public political campaign in the history of Israel. And to emphasize how successful it was, I always like asking people, there was a judicial reform in Israel 2 years ago, which led to riots and demonstrations and a huge political conflict. And if you ask who won, so far you can say that the liberals won. And when you talk about, there was a campaign in 2004 not to disengage from Gaza, and we disengaged. Who won? You can say maybe the left, and the right lost. And then ask people, who won the Don't Leave the Golan campaign? And the answer is everyone. If you ask people from the right wing who live in the Golan, they'll say we won, but also our neighbors from the left won, because we were here together. No one lost in this campaign. Everyone won, and that's what made it so successful. And that's why the Golan today is such a deep consensus in Israel. And we're working very hard to make it an international consensus when everyone looks at what's happening in Syria. So friends, I'll just remind everyone that I explained that we border with, also with Syria. Here, you can see a green, black, and red. That's our side with Syria. But also you can see with the yellow that we border with Lebanon. I want to remind everyone that on October 8th, Hezbollah joins Hamas and starts an attack on northern Israel. And that leads to the evacuation of many towns. You can see the whole red line in the Galilee is evacuated, basically creating a security zone on the Israeli side of the border, meaning between the red line of Route 89 up to the border here in gray, no Israeli residents, only military forces. And that's, in my eyes, is one of the greatest strategic and moral failures of this war. I must say that I, on October 7, went, and by the way, also the mayor, my governor, he was a paratrooper, I'm a tankist. We both went down south. We were in action until February. We came back a few weeks before elections. I remind you, on October 6th, we were candidates. We were talking about improving education. We were talking about improving infrastructure. We were talking about the economy. And we came back to a whole different reality where we couldn't understand it at first, but we understood afterwards that what happened in the Golan is that in the first few months, there was no school. Everything was shut down because there was a threat that from Syria, there were Iranian and Hezbollah forces will try invading Israel to create an October 7th scenario. Around December, things stabilized up to us being elected. And perfectly enough, around March, we enter office and we find out that the most important thing that we're going to deal with in the next few months is the war. Because if the war looked like something far that's happening in Gaza and in the Galilee, no. What happened was in March is that Hezbollah decided that from now on, whenever Israel strikes past a certain line in Lebanon, the equation is that they're going to strike the Golan Heights. And so if we would see now on Twitter, or X, sorry, and Telegram and social media, that there were explosions past that line in Lebanon, which means Israel probably is involved, we knew we need to prepare bomb shelters. And that led from March through April, where we had also the mass Iranian attack, which mostly came from the east and went through us. If you recall the first Iranian attack on Israel in April, right before Passover, hundreds of missiles and killer drones. They come from the east. They fly over the Golan in order to hit Haifa in the center of Israel. But since we have our amazing interception systems, it all happened over our heads. I still remember 2 a.m. there was fireworks in the sky. And things start escalating. In May, Nasrallah finds out there's a great gig. When you shoot at civilians, there's an Iron Dome, the amazing system we have to protect lives. So it intercepts most of it. But the Golan, you saw it green and beautiful, becomes dry. And you have a lot of dry land. I'm going to show you a picture in a moment. And what happens is that you find yourself, what Nasrallah started doing, he starts shooting at open areas, but that leads to mass fires. And the mass fires with the wind quickly come and start threatening the lives of the civilians in the towns. And the Iron Dome can't prevent it. When I was preparing my campaign, then I consulted with different politicians and previous mayors. And one of the greatest tips they told me, they said, when you enter office, there's the routine. And you find yourself dealing with the day-to-day trouble. In our slang, we call it you're putting out fires, right? And they said, always make sure that 80% of the time you put out the fires, but leave 20% of your time for strategy, for long-term thinking. Friends, I don't know if there's many governors that can share with you that they dealt literally with putting out fires, but that was our summer. Many times I found myself literally taking the hoses and just running into the fire to take it out before it reaches our civilians. And of course, there were more people, but many times the people were falling off their feet. They needed that leadership. They needed people. They needed to see their leaders with them. And hundreds of thousands of meters were burnt in the most beautiful place in Israel from these mass fires. I want to share with you maybe, though, the more dramatic effect. And the more dramatic effect is what happens to our residents. What happens to my 3 young daughters? The oldest is 8 years old. Suddenly, we're facing something totally different than the beginning of the war. We're facing sirens and rocket attacks while children are going to kindergarten. This is a photo taken by a mother lying down on the floor. And you see, the kids have no shelter. By the way, in the Golan, because we're so close to the border, we don't have time to run to bomb shelters. You just lie down, you put your hands on your head. And maybe I'll share with you from my oldest daughter's school. So the middle school girls in June had a party ending their year. And this is what happened. I don't know if you can hear. It's not. Why the once? I don't know if you heard, but the sirens went off from a killer drone attack while in the middle of their party. This video unfortunately became viral in Israel. That became a reality. And suddenly, off record, government officials come to us and military officials, and they say, please consider evacuating certain towns that we feel are in high threat. You're threatened from Syria. You're threatened from Lebanon. Maybe you should evacuate. We immediately answered with one word: no. Because as I said, evacuating 85,000 Jews from their homes on October 7, it's okay. You needed to do something. We didn't know what's happening. But after a few weeks, you need to come back home. And we saw that wherever there's civilians, Hezbollah did try to minimize casualties. It's crazy to say this, but they were mainly shooting at military bases and open areas, which is not fun. And we'll talk about the casualties shortly. But the moment Hezbollah woke up every morning and there were empty towns, they just started bombing those towns. I met today an American couple from California who were in Kfar Aza, where one of the most horrible massacres happened in the Gaza envelope. And they said they were in a town called Metula on the Lebanese border yesterday. And they said Metula looks worse than the towns in Gaza. And what happens to a community that's evacuated? The communities are falling apart. Violence, drugs, divorces. The kids keep on moving. They're living in hotels. No stability. Every survey that's done amongst the evacuees shows that 40% won't come back home. So we immediately said, hell no, we're not evacuating. We understand it's dangerous. We expect the Israeli army and the Israeli government to take care of what's needed to be taken care of so we can live here. And we became heroes on the media. Everyone loved interviewing us. The guys who won't evacuate, kol hakavod. And then on July 9th, two of our residents are driving to do shopping. It's a Wednesday night, Tuesday night, July 9th. 7 p.m., 50 rockets are shot by Hezbollah. Most of them are intercepted by the Iron Dome. But statistics, one directly hits their car. It's 1 to a billion that a stupid rocket can hit a driving car. Noah and Nir Baranes are immediately killed. They leave behind 3 orphans. And I still remember driving by their bodies. And when I met the governor later that night at 2 a.m., after we were with their kibbutz, with their community, to help them and bring in social workers and everything we needed, we're sitting in the office and we're looking into each other's eyes, 2 or 3 a.m. And we didn't have to ask the question, but we asked it with our eyes. Are we doing the right thing? Because so far it was so romantic. And every survey we did showed that our community, over 90% support our approach. And every time residents from the Golan were interviewed, they were saying our words. We're not evacuating. It's the wrong strategic thing. It's the wrong moral thing. We're going to stand our ground. We're strong. We're resilient. And then you have 2 bodies of your civilians lying in front of you. Our conclusion at the end of that night was that as painful as it is, we must stay. And by the way, it wasn't just our conclusion. The Golan community and leadership decided it with us. We're staying. A week and a half later, again, we had a test. A rocket hits the Druze town of Majd al-Shams, killing 12 children. 12 children playing soccer. That is the turning point of all of the war in northern Israel, by the way. First of all, I'm an observant Jew. My governor is an observant Jew. We were on our phones and drove there on Shabbat. And we went to help our Druze brothers and sisters. And we were there for them with our resiliency, with everything we could help them. remember I told you about the Jewish community starting to integrate into the Israeli society? I think this was a dramatic turning point, which we still don't understand. Because suddenly they understood what does it mean to be part of the Israeli society, not just for bad when you're hit because you're part of the Jewish state, but also because suddenly the whole Israeli society came to support them. Thousands and thousands of people came from all around the country to embrace them. And Jewish federations from North America are supporting them, even though they're not Jewish. And you saw how appreciative they were. And they understood what does it mean to be part of such a strong, resilient, and moral community. And I think that when I share with you what's happening in the past few weeks, I think that was a turning point also for them. But it was also a turning point for all of the operation. Because that was the moment, 12 children being slaughtered, the Israeli government decided enough is enough. A week later, the chief of staff of Hezbollah was eliminated. And a few days later, the Israeli government finally, almost a year late, declared that one of the goals of the war is to have the civilians return to their homes. The whole focus was down on Gaza. And in the north, we were in a horrible situation where we were very passive. Today, we know that we did different things that we couldn't talk about. But in general, the feeling was that we're passive. We're just waiting there for them to bomb us. 12 children here, 2 residents here. By the way, 2 more soldiers were killed in the Golan in July. So that's a total of 16 Israelis murdered in the Golan in 1 month. Finally, towards the end of August, we understand something's moving. September 1st, there's a huge public discussion in the Golan. Should kids go back to school? Because our residents being murdered on the roads revealed the fact that the Iron Dome cannot cover all of the roads. The Golan is huge. So the focus is on the urban areas. And parents came to us and said, if the roads are not safe, I cannot send my kids to school. You need to drive, you need to go on buses. We reached the prime minister and the chief of staff who personally made sure, now I'm allowed to say this, that every morning and every afternoon when our children are on the road, all Iron Dome batteries are focused on protecting them, full protection. And just listen to this number. 97% of the Golan children open the school year on September 1st. I think it says a lot about this community, our resilience. And no, we're not crazy. We're very rational people. But we understood that we must continue our life, and the kids that lost so many days of school, they need some stability. After a month, the Israeli army enters Lebanon, including my unit, the 188. I find myself in a huge dilemma. I'm the deputy governor in war. I'm exempt from reserve duty, and my commanders keep on calling. They need me to come and help. Luckily enough, our headquarters were in the Golan, even though the whole brigade was in Lebanon. So at day, I found myself again, very Israeli situation. At day, I'm the governor, deputy governor. At night, I'm a combat operations officer running operations in Lebanon. If you ask me when did I sleep, I didn't. And what happened to us, I'll just say, and then that will lead me to Syria, is that suddenly, instead of all the fire being shot at the Golan, and I'm just going to show you, this is a killer drone that came from Iraq and it directly hit a kibbutz, killing 2 horses, which is tragic. Luckily enough, the 2 children that were riding the horses were able to jump and put their heads on their hands on their heads, and their lives were saved. But this was our routine for months. Suddenly, they were going all around Israel, not just at us. So Haifa's under fire, and there's less rockets here. But because of the threat, no schools, no economy, everything's shut down. And there we felt our community's resilience is at a crucial moment. And 3% of the Golan population left the Golan. Some just went for a vacation. Some went even abroad for a few months. and some said, enough is enough, I'm leaving for good. And our challenge was to really keep the community together. And I'm very glad we succeeded in doing that. And after the ceasefire in Lebanon, we said, wonderful, let's start bringing back tourism. Let's start focus on rebuilding our economy. Let's start putting a very strong emphasis on our children's mental health care, but also their studies, everything. And then the drama in Syria begins. To make a long story short, because I know I'm assuming that many of you follow the news. So I'll just say about Syria that Syria is an artificial country with different groups. There was a civil war there for 13 years. At some points, it looked like the rebels are going to win. And when I say the rebels, it's various groups from the Kurds to the Druze to different groups linked to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. At certain points, they controlled the border between Israel and Syria. But in 2018, Assad, backed by Hezbollah and Iran and the Russians, took over most of the country. My personal assessment was that Assad won the war, but the war is not over. And I said the war is not over because we kept on seeing riots in the past 2 years by the border with Israel. The locals weren't happy that Assad, instead of rebuilding his country and reuniting his population, was focused on his personal survival and drug dealing and his family's economy instead of the country's economy. And he didn't really care about the region. He let Hezbollah build a whole mass force against us. Hezbollah was trying to build what it had in Lebanon in front of the Golan Heights, and we were constantly trying to prevent that. 13 years, the rebels failed. They couldn't unite, and the Russians and the Iranians helped Assad, and he was controlling most of the country. And then, in less than 13 days, the rebels succeed, and Assad loses his regime. Just so you understand how dramatic this is, my friend was at the headquarters of the Golan Heights military unit, and the chief of staff comes for an urgent meeting because the rebels have taken over Aleppo. Okay, Aleppo, just for those who are not familiar with Syria, Idlib is where the rebels were very strong and located, only here, and then they took over Aleppo. The chief of staff has an urgent meeting. What do we do? Knowing that what are the outcomes of the fact that the rebels took over Aleppo? An hour into the meeting, his secretary comes in and gives him a note. The rebels have taken over Hama, another central city. He says, guys, 1 second, let's rethink it again. They took over Aleppo and Hama. An hour later, another note. They took over Homs, and they're on their way to Damascus. And that's when the chief of staff understands it's over. Assad lost. There's a new reality. The new reality facing Israel, especially the Golan Heights. Okay, I have a question about Gaza. I'll answer it shortly and even gladly. So I'll just say that what happens is that we understand, learning the lessons from October 7, that we cannot be passive. We cannot sit on our side of the border and wait and see what happens. We can't. There's two great lessons we learned from October 7. The first is the necessity of a strong civilian frontier, which is exactly what I discussed in the past 20 minutes or so. And the second lesson is that if your enemy or opponent has the ability, you do something. You don't try acting according to what you believe is his intentions. If Hamas is training for taking over military bases and slaughtering civilians and kidnapping them, and they have the ability to do it, you don't convince yourself or think, 1 second, yes, they have the ability, but I think Sinwar is actually a rational guy, and it looks like he's looking to stabilize his economy. So everything's okay. No, we learned it the hard way in 1973, and we learned it the hard way in 2023. In Syria, friends, just to understand, there are chemical weapons. There's the strongest army in the region. Tanks, missiles, ballistic missiles. There's a bunch of radical guys armed who just want a war. And I know it's very romantic. It's very, very romantic what happened there. And honestly, I'm very happy for the Syrian people. I'm not being cynical. I'm very happy. Assad was an evil dictator. I saw in my eyes as a Golan resident how he was bombing his own people with 2,000 bombs every week until they surrendered. I'm very glad it's over. But Al-Qaeda is not such a friendly neighbor. So right now they're focused on their trouble. But can someone guarantee that the leftovers of Hezbollah from Syria, and Hezbollah had forces in Syria, and the leftovers of ISIS and guys from Al-Qaeda won't use the opportunity with all the chaos in Syria and strike Israel and strike the Golan community? If they have the ability, you don't wait. And friends, we're living in historical times. As I speak, there are Israeli troops who have crossed the border. Not a secret. I showed you a picture at the beginning of me standing there. We're controlling all the first line of Assad's military bases. And we're not building new communities, of course, but we are even creating infrastructure to allow us to protect the region properly. How long are we going to be there for? At least a few months. Until we know we can trust the people on the other side and pull back. I know in some, I every day I give interviews to international media. I hear also the criticism. I hear the questions. Is Israel planning to take over and occupy? Friends, we're there for security. We're there because it's the right thing right now. And I'll live with international criticism, and I'll live with the CNN reporter bashing me as long as I know that my daughter is safe. And right now, the Israeli army, paratroopers and tanks are controlling the Syrian side. It includes several Syrian towns. And I might surprise you, but when I drove into Syria, first of all, I always imagined if I ever go into Syria, it's going to be in an armed vehicle and a tank and everything. I drove in a Jeep, a Jeep that you can see on the roads. And I can criticize the soldiers saying I think they feel a little bit too comfortable. But suddenly a few Syrian children started coming towards our Jeep. And I'm very tense. And I tell the captain next to me, I said, listen. And he said, don't worry. I said, what do you mean, don't worry? He says, these guys love us. I sat with the sheikh, the leader of the community, just last night for coffee. I asked him to collect all of the weapons in his town, and he collected all of them and handed them over to us. If you wonder how such a scenario can happen, I think, first of all, that after 13 years of a civil war, they know we're not their enemy. More than that, for those of you who might not know, in the years where there was no Syrian regime because of the civil war by the border, and there was just chaos there, Israel reached out to these towns and gave humanitarian aid to help the innocent civilians there. They remember us. Many of them owe their lives to us. Many of them have been to Israel. So you won't be surprised that every town the Israeli army entered, we knew exactly who are the local leaders, who are the more moderate guys, who are the troublemakers, what should we focus on? So that's the current situation. Life in the Golan is as normal. The Israeli army consulted with us. Should we cancel school? We insisted not. We said, finally, we're back to school after a month where we didn't have school because of the war in Lebanon. We need our kids. Their mental health is not less important than their physical health. And I told my teams that I believe that we should prepare for around Tu B'Shvat, which is February, to start doing campaigns to bring people back. Friends, the second weekend after the ceasefire in Lebanon, which was also the weekend where Israel invaded Syria, we were over 70% in the hotels in the Golan. Everywhere I go, the wineries are packed every weekend. You want to get a seat at a restaurant, you need to stand in line. There's a waiting list. The Israelis weren't here for over a year. They love the Golan, they miss the Golan, and they're coming back big time. Now it's time for you guys to come. So that's the situation now, and I must say that I sleep very well at night when my little son doesn't wake me up, knowing that there are soldiers on the other side who are there to make sure everything is stable, and that we can focus on rebuilding, we can focus on growing, and we can focus on life. That's the Army's job. Rabbi, I think I'll open it for questions, but I already have here, I see several questions here, so I'll try answering. First of all, I'll answer the question about Syria. I don't think we should take the Syrian Druze who requested to join Israel, and that's because they were very loyal to Hezbollah and to Assad. And even though we protected them because they're brothers of our residents, yes, we protected our own enemies, I think it's too much of a danger. And again, when I look at the international community and how, I have a question about Gaza here in a moment, but how we're criticized for protecting ourselves in Gaza after what we went through on October 7th, and in Lebanon and in Syria, then the last thing I think I want is a Syrian town to be annexed to Israel, although they really, from what I understand, they want it. By the way, the Israeli Druze, so first of all, the numbers of Druze in the Golan getting Israeli IDs is continuing to rise. And I'll tell you a little secret. I know I'm being recorded, but I'll deny it afterwards. In the past few weeks, we, the Jewish Council, were getting a lot of requests from young Druze high school students who want our help to draft to the Israeli army. They understand the game is over, and they're not scared of Assad anymore, and they want to be an integral part of the state of Israel. So that's the answer to that. I was asked here about Israeli citizens. How does I feel about the number of Hamas citizens killed by the IDF? If you'd speak to me 10 years ago, after Operation Protective Edge, which I took part in, I would tell you a whole, Israeli ID is the same as the citizenship mark. So I'll answer, I think it was John who asked. I took part in the 2014 war in Gaza and several more operations. And Tony can share with you that I gave him a whole session of how we did our best to prevent innocent lives. After October 7, friends, my perception has changed. Because, you know what? Not me. Let's listen to the Hamas spokesperson. When different Hamas official spokesperson were confronted with the raping and beheading and all the horrible horrors of October 7, you know what they said? They said it wasn't our fighters, it was the civilians. The border was open. It's the civilians who did it. It's not our holy fighters. They only did the military side of the operation. So let's say I believe Hamas, okay? And in this case, by the way, it's half a lie, half truth. It was also the fighters and also the civilians. Friends, it's all on social media. Everyone saw it. Everyone heard the 12-year-old child calling his parent and saying, "Mom, I killed 10 Jews in my own hand." I don't use the term innocent citizens. That's the first thing. After that being said, I'm a Jew, and my DNA and my values won't allow me. I won't kill people who are not armed, even if they might have been part of the massacre. And I'm speaking as someone who was there. I was in Gaza. I ran operations. One of my responsibilities, actually, as a combat operations officer, was to minimize the civilian casualties. And You know, this is not the topic of this discussion, but I must react. A Druze friend of mine who was killed in November 2nd in Gaza was one of the first commanders to come into the town of Be'eri, where one of the worst massacres happened. His name is Salman, Lieutenant Colonel Salman Khabka. Okay, he's not Jewish. A few days before entering Gaza, we had coffee together, and I asked him, as the heritage officer of the unit, who's very familiar with Israeli battle heritage, I said, can you look back at our military heritage, with both of us we know all the stories, and compare what you saw on October 7 to one of our previous battles, maybe from the 1973 war, 1967, 1948, something. He thought for a moment, and then he answered in one word. He said, Auschwitz. When I went to Poland as an IDF captain, I'm a grandson of Holocaust survivors. For me, it was like a family event. It's personal. It's family. When Lieutenant Colonel Salman went, he's not Jewish. He went as a human being. He heard there was something called the Holocaust, and he went to see. He told me that there were two things he couldn't grasp. He said the first was that there's such evil in this world, and the second was the amounts. If anyone here has been to one of the death camps, there are piles of shoes, piles of glasses, piles of clothes. And it's very hard to grasp that it belonged to people. And Salman says to me, when I entered Be'eri and I see that evil, I understood there is such evil. And I understood that it's here. He said, I used to think, back in the 30s, people apparently weren't educated enough. I don't know, today, in the era of knowledge and global, right, everything's so great, it can't happen again. And he couldn't grasp that it happened then. And then he saw it in front of his eyes. And I'm ashamed that there are people who are denying what happened there, because it was all here in front of our eyes. If in 1930 I needed to look for films or something to prove, it was all here. It was all here. They filmed it. They filmed it. So how can someone deny it? And I'll maybe say one last thing, because I want to, it's important. It's important we had it here. We can't ignore it. We can't ignore it. My grandfather, who passed away 6 years ago, he was very ill. And I called him one day, and he told me he's on his way to Georgia Tech to give a talk to students. And I said to him, Zaidi, I said, you're not well. Why don't you rest? And he said, because I must make sure that people won't be ignorant like they were back then. And back then I said, my old grandpa and his personal trauma, I can't understand it. Friends, there's no genocide in Gaza. There's no army in the world that does as much as we do, including endangering our own lives, which many times I believe is not the right thing to do. But that's the Israeli policy, so we do it. And I can tell you that if we would treat Gaza properly and give them the minimum humanitarian aid needed for their babies, 98 hostages would be back home, the war would end, and much less civilians in Gaza and much less civilians and soldiers in Israel were killed. You choose evil, you choose terror, you pay a price. And that's for that.
Yaakov, thank you so much. We had intentionally wanted to keep our focus on Golan, which is your area. So I'd like to refocus us back to that, though I appreciate, because we hear very little from soldiers in who have been to Gaza. we don't hear it on the American side. So sharing your experience and your truth as a commander is also important for us. So appreciate you sharing that. If I can, I'll just take a personal privilege here, getting back to Golan and to the story of Iran. Because one of the things we didn't talk about with the fall of the Assad regime is also the withdrawal of Iran from the Syrian side. The pipeline of material directly to Hezbollah into Lebanon. And, you know, Iran has been the story of Gaza, Hezbollah. It's been the entire story. And all the wars that have been fought, the proxies that have been there. So what's your sense as someone who's really living on the edge, as you talked about? What's your sense of what is this new world if Iran is indeed withdrawing? How does that change the calculus all around for Israel?
Great question. I put here this slide, which shows the Iranian strategy of what we call the Ring of Fire. But this was the greatest nightmare, not just of Israel, the whole Middle East, the moderate states in Saudi Arabia and Jordan, the moderate regimes. King Abdullah of Jordan called it the Shiite axis. Iran is Shiite. Most of the Middle East is Sunni. And I must say that, I'll say just that the Muslims are divided. Most of them are Sunni, and the Shiites are a minority, and the two parties do not get along. Very rarely there's partnerships such as Hamas joining and being funded by Iran because there's a joint enemy. In this case, it's Israel. And the Iranian strategy was to go into many countries that weren't stable: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, build proxies, give them funding, give them ammunition, give them knowledge, and basically create an axis that leads them to Israel, but also then gives them, if you look at this map, the ability to bring down other countries such as Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, etc., etc. We're just one little piece in the story. And on October 6, 2023, things were looking very good for Iran. The American administration wanted to have a new deal for the nuke deal. And in Syria, Assad was very weak, which meant they were very strong. In Lebanon, Hezbollah was preventing a new president from being elected, very strong political force, very strong military force. Iraq, Yemen, etc. Things were looking very good. The Iranians, Hezbollah, we know today had a plan to do October 7 just in the north. And I must tell you that one of the things for me that was very shocking, my first day in the headquarters while we were in Lebanon, we started getting photos from houses, civilian houses, by the way, following our previous discussion. And I start counting the amount of high-quality anti-tank missiles. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just so you understand, the best anti-tank missile that our opponents have, in all of Gaza, there were 8 of them. In the first house, in a small town in southern Lebanon, we found 6. In the next house, there were 8 more. Meaning in 2 small houses, in a very small random town in southern Lebanon, not one of the central ones, there were more high-quality missiles than all the Gaza Strip. Do you understand what that means if Nasrallah would be the first one to attack and not Sinwar? And ironically enough, the Shiite axis surrounding Israel from Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and they were working on Jordan and Judea and Samaria, what's called the West Bank. Suddenly, the Sunni guy, Sinwar, goes first without coordinating. And eventually, without realizing it, it looks like he led to the fall of this axis. Tens of billions of dollars, decades of efforts were eliminated from August until today. Several months. We're talking about, again, tens of billions of dollars that were invested by the Iranian regime instead of investing in their poor society and their medical system, etc., invested in Hezbollah and other groups, went down the drain. The situation today in the Shiite axis is that Iran is weaker than ever. It lost its own anti-aircraft protective systems. It lost its axis, its ground axis to Lebanon, where they have their most successful entrepreneurship, Hezbollah, the greatest Iranian expert to the world. Gaza is also gone, even though there's still a war happening there. There's still hostages. They're still shooting at Israel. But Hamas is weaker than ever also. And I think that the Iranians are very, I'll give an understatement, they're very furious with Hamas for what they did. Because even though it was so-called a huge success, causing such a horrible tragedy to Israel and taking over Israeli towns and taking over Israeli military bases and kidnapping Israelis and everything we discussed, it wasn't planned properly, wasn't coordinated properly, and they came surprised into this thing. They didn't really want to join this war. They sort of had to because they're part of the Axis. And friends, we're living in historical times. Just understand, the Syrian army, an ally of Iran, was eliminated from the air in 48 hours by the Israeli army. That's unbelievable. Iran, we were afraid of Iran for so many years. We were petrified. What's going to happen if, God forbid, they shoot at us? And twice they shot hundreds of missiles, and life continued in Israel. We eliminated most of it. Our system took care of it. So, God forbid, we cannot be full of ourselves and be confident. But I do believe, Rabbi, we're in a historical window of opportunities to eliminate the Iranian threat, to do different moves, also political moves, and I would say psychological warfare, to bring the people, just like in Syria it happened, to bring down the regime. But if that doesn't happen, it might be the right time to use force and sanctions, very powerful financial sanctions, to bring down that evil. But after that, I must say that there's another axis. Just remember, always put one rule in your head. In the Middle East, when the Shiites fall, the Sunnis rise. When the Sunnis rise, the Shiites fall. And right now, the Shiites are falling after a decade of great successes for them. We see a very great threat from Turkey. The biggest winner of what happened in Syria is Erdogan. And we must have our eyes open. What's going to happen now on the radical Sunni side, which is Al-Qaeda and Turkey and others. And we need to make sure that the dominant force in the Sunni world will be the moderate leadership, if it's MBS and if it's the United Arab Emirates. So now is a historical window of opportunities where the West and Israel need to make moves also to maximize the pressure on Iran to totally bring down the axis, but also to make sure that moderate forces rise, and they will be the leading forces in the Middle East, and that can bring, as we saw in the Abraham Accords, that can bring a brighter future for the region. And I'll say also for the people of Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza, I think that the moment they understand that connecting to the moderate leadership and not the terror is the right thing to do, and that will bring them prosperity and safety, then the moment they finally choose to do that, I believe we'll see positive things in the region. And I have no choice in the Middle East but to be also optimistic in different ways. Maybe, Rabbi, maybe to conclude, I want to maybe say one last word, unless there's another critical question.
No, I just wanted to one thing, if you will, and then I do want to get your last word, and that's a little bit understanding the regional councils, because that's your governmental position, and I think most of us don't quite know how the regional councils operate in relation to the national government.
Okay, I'll answer your question, not the question in the chat, even though I can answer that the Jewish people went through the worst tragedy in world history, or modern world history, and were able to make decisions. But we'll leave that aside. In Israel, you have the government, the central government, the federal government, and then you have 257 regional municipalities. You have, of course, city councils, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, but in the country and the more losing my English, less populated areas, you have regional councils that have a lot of land. And what's unique about a regional council is that basically we have 33 towns, each has their own little council, and we supervise everything. So basically, I need to know to work with the government for the whole region, but also to help 33 different communities, each have their own needs and their own wills and their own, I would say, different values sometimes, and we need to sort of run the whole show. We're very, very dependent on government funding, which is not good. One of the biggest challenges I was planning on dealing with prior to the war. One of my biggest plans was to try building an economic plan to allow us to try being more independent. There are very few regional councils in Israel that are independent financially. And if you ask me, and I'll criticize my own, which is okay. I'll criticize my own country. I think it's part of the divide and conquer. Meaning, if I'm independent enough, I don't need the government. I can do great things on my own. Then what are they here for? If you ask me, again, I see the model in the United States of America. I would love to have that model here. Maximum independence for each state, et cetera, et cetera. Here, the fact that I'm also very dependent on the government means I'm very, very careful with the way I act in front of the government. So, for instance, if I have criticism on how they're dealing with the hostages, I won't say it publicly. I won't say it on the media. I'll say what I need to say, of course, but I always have to think, are my people going to pay a price for it? And that's something that I believe is not healthy. Of course, we say what we need to say. We're very clear. But again, I think you understand what I'm saying. I need to make sure that the so-and-so minister is happy with me because I need to make sure I get the funding from him. And that's something I believe is not healthy. I want minimum government involvement. That would be my dream. But again, that's reality. And that's the rules of the game. We play by the rules of the game. I hope I answered the question. But it's a very big problem in the north. I can share with you, I had a meeting with the Bloomberg Foundation. They brought teams to help in the Gaza envelope to help the regional councils there. They had 6 regional councils to deal with. And when they came up here, only in the Eastern Galilee, they found 18. Total in Northern Israel, you have 94 councils. And they had a very hard time because, and it's very hard also for us. You want to bring a hospital to the north. Every governor wants the hospital to be in his regional council. But you need to agree. And that's something we're trying really hard to work on, the governor and I, to create these bridges and to make sure that everyone understands. We're in the Golan, by the way, we do it phenomenally. We work with each other. All 7 councils, we work together. I think we're pretty good at it. But when you look around, I want to make sure that Safed and Kiryat Shmona and Matula, that we're all together. We all have the same interest. And that's one of the biggest problems Northern Israel has right now. That politically, the councils are divided. Each mayor has his agenda. Each one wants to make sure he's fine for his residents. And we need to learn to look at the whole region and work together.
That's really helpful. I happen to, I visited the regional council of the Gaza envelope about a month after October 7th. And the kind of work that they were doing to help everybody who had left and helping them to resettle in other areas and dealing with the aftermath. But it's not something that I think we hear very much about in the United States about because we see sort of one message coming out of the government, and that's the national the Knesset. But you guys are really on the ground.
Right. Also in COVID, also during the war, we see the most effective government organization to impact civilian life is the regional councils. We live our people. We know what they need. We know them personally. And we keep on telling the government, let us be independent as possible. We'll do a great, we're much faster than you. We're much more connected, but it's some ministers understand it, some don't. It's politics. I understand I'm a politician. I probably spoke too much here, things I shouldn't have said also. I just hope our ministers don't know English too well. But it's okay.
We're not distributing this recording, so
And we won't
Okay.
publicize it to
we
them.
won't
Okay,
publicize
so
it.
maybe I want to maybe end with one last important message, which maybe will also answer why the heck I went into Syria. I was asked several times by reporters, how can I explain how for 13 years the rebels weren't successful, and in 13 days they brought down the whole Syrian regime? And my thought on that is I want to go back to October 7 again. Let's try entering Yahya Sinwar, who's a cruel, sick man, but brilliant. I must give him the credit. And let's try understanding what was he thinking when he made the decision. Let's say late October 6th, he says, okay, now is D-Day. We're going for it. He looks around him, and let's look strategically. First of all, he looks at Israel and he says their greatest ally, their strategic ally, the United States, they're not connected like they were before. Maybe even they won't come to help Israel. That's the feeling. Okay, let's look at the Israeli army. You look at Israeli media, you read the reports. There are people who are refusing to come and serve. There are commanders that are saying we're starting, if we don't train these people who refuse to come, we're going to start losing our ability to protect the country. And he says, well, the army's very weak. They're full of themselves, right? They don't expect it. They're very naive. And if I look at the society in Israel, they're also torn apart. And all around the region, he said, if I coordinate with Nasrallah, Israel will know. He was right, by the way. Now we know with the whole amazing Beeper operation, that everything happening in Hezbollah, we knew. So if Sinwar would call Nasrallah and say, listen, buddy, I need you to coordinate. October 7, 6:29 a.m., we're doing it, we wouldn't know. We would be prepared. So he goes on his own, but when he looks at the full picture, he says they won't get help from their strategic ally. Their military is weak, and the people are weak, and it's all going to collapse. And when it all collapses, Nasrallah will just join in. Assad will join in. The Palestinians will join in. You know what? Maybe even the Israeli Arabs will join in. Everyone's going to be fighting them. They'll be fighting each other. In the worst case scenario, it's a great success. And in the best case, it's the end of this country. But if you ask, why did he do it? Didn't he understand he's bringing his end on him and Israel will destroy Gaza? I think that's what he thought. Let's go now a few weeks back to what's happening in Idlib, when Mohammed al-Jalani needs to make the decision, is he striking Aleppo and taking this risk, right? And he looks around and he says, let's look at Assad's strategic allies. Russia's stuck in Ukraine. Iran was deeply harmed by Israel. Hezbollah lost and is very weak right now. They probably won't come and help him. So the strategic allies out of the picture. The military is very weak. And more than that, probably the military is so weak, so many groups are fighting each other there that many of them will join me. And the civilian, the society is so torn apart and so angry at the government that they'll also go against the government. So if I give the first move on Aleppo, from all directions, it's going to come. It's going to work. Sinwar was wrong. El-Jalani was right. Same picture, more or less. El-Jalani was right because his assessments turned out to be correct. Within 13 days, he brought down the Syrian regime. He broke the Shiite axis. And even though Yahya Sinwar tactically had a huge success, strategically, he had the wrong picture. He did not understand that there's two things that are stronger than anything here. The first thing is our resilience, and the second thing is our spirit. Maybe it's even the same thing. Because no matter how much we fought each other on October 6th, maybe even we thought we hated each other, when it came to the money time, every Israeli stopped everything he was doing and went to help his brothers and sisters. There was no army on October 7th. There were many soldiers. The main command collapsed. That did not stop tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians to take a gun, or even without a gun, and just go down to save their country. And the same thing happened up north. When I drove down south to join my unit, I was petrified what's going to happen when Hezbollah joins it. I was sure that's what's going to happen. But many people like me who were assigned to the northern border just went quickly, got on their tanks, got out of the base, and were there. By October 7, at darkness, there were 3 brigades protecting the northern border at least. That's a whole division. Another division added to what was there before. And Nasrallah understood he can't join in like he planned. Assad can't join in. And down there, we were already starting to take over the situation. So look at where we started. Where are we today? I think the main thing is the spirit. And in these days where we see against demonstrations and political disagreements, we need to stick to that spirit. We need to remember that it's what that saved us. And when I was asked to come and give a motivational talk to soldiers in Syria, then I think you'll agree with me now that it's worth endangering your life to do that, because that's what makes the difference. Assad did not have that spirit. The moment the first battle they lost, his soldiers lost, it was a domino. The whole army fell apart. They didn't have their why. They didn't have their story that brought them together and made a difference. So I believe that's really what led to his fall, that there was no spirit there. And I think that's what really turned the tables, that we're standing here a year later and we're in full control of what's happening in Syria, full control in southern Lebanon, and also in Gaza with all the pain. We do have a much better situation there than it was before. And there's a lot of complexities there, as people here are writing me. But again, I recommend, as the rabbi said, many people don't know many things happening here. All you have to do is just come here, see on your own eyes, bear evidence, and understand what's happening on both sides of the border.
And Yaakov, I wanted to say before you leave that we look forward to that. We want to hear the peace has returned. The strawberries are there. The goat farms are there. We can make ice cream together, and you can tell us all these stories up on a beautiful hill somewhere. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Amen to that.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you,
Very generous
Yaakov.
with you.
And thank you, Tony, for bringing Yaakov to us. So
Thank you very
enjoy
much.
the day. Thank you.
Thank you. You're very generous with your time. It's quite late for you, and hopefully your boy doesn't keep you up even later.
So, thank you, Toda Rabba, and thank you for all of your
Thank you.
support and for questions and everything.
Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you, and hopefully very soon, and hopefully in peace, the hostages returned home.
Amen to that.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Go to.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.